How will we address the climate crisis? Climate One with Greg Dalton brings together advocates, influencers, and policymakers in empowering conversations that connect all aspects of the climate emergency, the individual and the systemic, the scary and the exciting, to help you understand the most critical issue of our time. Because addressing the climate crisis begins by talking about it.
Our food and agricultural systems are helping fuel the climate emergency. But climate isn't the only harm. These systems also impact local economies, human health, and animal welfare. Senator Cory Booker has a plan to address our broken food system. He introduced legislation that would challenge large industrial beef and pork packagers and tilt the balance of power in our industrial agricultural system, giving family farmers, ranchers, and workers a better deal. But what chance do these elements have of passage? And what other options are there for decreasing the concentration of power in big ag? Senator Cory Booker, today on Climate One.
Food is one area where climate can often seem very abstract, like power plants and things remote from people, but food is a place where people, if you're fortunate, you can vote 3 times a day with your fork. I didn't know that agriculture is the 3rd largest industry in New Jersey. So talk about food and climate and what brought you to be so passionate about food.
A lot of it is our W.B. Du Bois in The Souls of Black Folk talked about the tragedy of man, forgive the genderized language, but the tragedy of humanity is that we know so little about each other. And a lot of things that allow injustice to fester is not being focused on learning about your neighbor, learning about your fellow person. And that means that we often get involved in these very impersonal systems that sustain and perpetuate injustices. Like I always say that I did not know the ills of fast fashion, for example, and I bought t-shirts, wore things, just never put my thought into, wait a minute, who made the shoes I'm wearing? Mm-hmm. What were the provenance of the clothing I'm wearing? And how am I, through my dollars and my ignorance, participating in systems that are pushing injustice on the individuals who are making them, injustice on our environment? And so for me, I never imagined 10 years ago when I got to the United States Senate that I would be battling, not really battling, but having to ask and maneuver myself to get onto the Agricultural Committee. I just never thought I would do it. And I did it because one of my great staff members came up to me and said, every issue you care about, all the issues you care about and have been working on intersect within our food system. Mm-hmm. And the more I listened, first I laughed at him, then I joined him, which is often the process. But I thought, you're insane. What do I want to sit on the Ag Committee for? But when we started really looking at our food system, I was stunned to realize how savagely broken it is. Mm-hmm. And the only people it really works for are these big multinational corporations that more and more are controlling everything that we eat. It is a system that's broken for farmers. If you interview farmers, the majority of American farmers are actually small farmers, but the system does not support them. They have higher suicide rates. They're going out of business at alarming rates. There's this mass consolidation of farmers. It's broken for farm workers. I was challenged by the United Farm Workers Association to go out and work a farm. I was stunned at, number one, how difficult the work was. But what was more stunning to me, besides the fact that I was sore for days and days afterwards, was just having conversations with the farm workers about sexual harassment, wage theft. It's broken for our ecology. What we prioritize and emphasize and incentivize is a farm system that poisons our lands, poisons our rivers and streams, causes flooding. Even though farmers are great stewards of the land, they're pushed into a system that often is very destructive. It's broken for our environment, climate change issues. It's broken for the end user. I give this last example of how Americans are trapped in this unjust system because their government is subsidizing all the foods that make us sick. While one part of government tells you half of your diet should be fresh fruits and vegetables, less than 10% of our ag subsidies go to that. And so kids in San Francisco or in Oakland could walk into a corner store and find a Twinkie product cheaper than an apple, not because of the free market, but because government has decided that we're going to cheapen the Happy Meal, we're going to cheapen the Twinkie, and all the other stuff that we want you to eat, we're going to make more expensive, harder to access, and drive rates of disease that most Americans should be stunned by. We live in a nation right now where 1 out of 3 of our government dollars, your tax dollars, is being spent on health care. And to pay for health care, where the majority of the things we're paying for are preventable diseases, the majority of them are diet-related diseases. So this food system is broken for everybody, but mostly it's broken for all of us, because we are seeing in America diabetes rates, hypertension, all of these rates of illness and disease and suffering spiking up, and our government is fueling that because they're subsidizing the fast food or the highly hyper-processed foods, and then we're paying for it again on Medicaid, Medicare, and healthcare benefits. There is a way out of this broken system, and that's one of the reasons why we moved to the Ag Committee, start finding common sense, win-win solutions to get America out of this sickness, illness, economic injustice, environmental injustice, climate fueling injustice, as well as injustice for American farmers.
Big ag gets us sick, and big farmers there to sell us pills when we get sick. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we're at this moment now where, talking about this food system, the Farm Bill comes up every 5 years. It is happening now. This is a big, unwieldy thing. What would you like to see in the Farm Bill to make both a healthier people and a healthier planet? You know, there's been some talk about climate-smart agriculture getting into the Farm Bill. It's this big, massive thing. What would you like to see in it?
Well, I want to set the stage a little bit. So my team has put out a suite of bills, often endorsed by the Farmers Union, by healthcare groups, by environmental groups, to deal with our food system. Whole suite that involves with everything from composting to food waste to big factory farms, CAFOs, to the overuse of antibiotics in our food system. We decided to put up a whole bunch of bills that can point to the way out. And we want to show folks that it doesn't have to be this way, and there are smart policy solutions that can do something about it. More than this, though, we wanted to go a little deeper and start talking about, unfortunately, the power of big ag in Washington. People often think that the oil industry is one of the most powerful lobbies. I would say that actually big food is more powerful because of their deep influence in the way we draw our policy up on both sides of the aisle. So simply as something that should not be controversial, should be based on science, like nutrition standards or school lunch programs, become these hotbeds of fights for folks that want to continue to push unhealthy food, deeply sugar-filled processed foods, and we're aware of that. So here's this Farm Bill, as you said, that rolls in every 5 years. We have tried to put out bills about the way to go, and what we're trying to do now is have some realpolitik on one hand about what knobs can we turn in this Farm Bill that could get us closer to some of our ambitious goals for health, well-being, climate change, and more. But at the same time, what I think is lacking in every great movement is just that courageous empathy we started with. You know, I'm a product of civil rights activist parents who would tell me that the civil rights movement wasn't a movement of black people for black rights. It was a conscious movement of creating a movement based on our common ideals and our common values. But the biggest obstacle was getting people to understand the crisis in our country that they were participating in and that their silence and inaction was contributing to. So the great thing about these incredible artists of activism in the civil rights movement is they found ways to dramatize what other people could not see. That's why the big standoff with Bull Connor, the big protests that they were able to do, that all of a sudden got people off the sidelines to realize what's happening. So this Farm Bill, I'll talk about the specific objectives we have, but our ability to make the change is really dependent upon the average American understanding that the system is broken and that I can do something, because there is not enough political will yet to make the kind of dramatic changes. So in the Farm Bill, there's a number of different areas where we're trying to turn knobs up. So one of them is this understanding to trust American farmers. They're very good stewards of the land, and they often know that they're doing things that are killing their soil which is rich in biodiversity, rich in the power to sequester carbon, to hold on to water. What's happened now is things that are allowing too much runoff, drought, poisoning their soil. I remember going to meet with a Republican farmer in the Midwest who told me, I used to be able to fish in my creek, I used to be able to drink from my well, but since the CAFO has moved here, I can't do either anymore. And so what we saw when I got onto the Ag Committee is that there are some very small programs in the Ag Committee, things like EQIP, and that have acronyms that I probably can't name every word for, but environmental programs that incentivize farmers to engage in environmental practices that help to create those win-win-win-wins. But they were way oversubscribed. So one of the things in the Inflation Reduction Act that my team was able to do was to put billions of dollars into these programs, which farmers rejoiced in, because now they're able to do things like cover crops, rotational grazing, and other things that we know fundamentally can not only help farmers be more successful, but actually can do things that help our ecology and our environment. And so those are the programs we're going after now to say, can we expand certain things? The one other specific example I'll give you, and I could go on and talking about the Farm Bill for a long time, but I want you to know this is one example, because a Farm Bill has two sides, sort of agricultural programs, but another big part of the Farm Bill is food stamps.
SNAP is the biggest part of it.
SNAP. And remember what SNAP is: Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. I'm not exaggerating. Coke and Pepsi make billions of dollars annually. Think about this for a second, because of SNAP payments being used to buy sugar water. Billions of dollars. And the correlation between sugar waters and diabetes rates is stunning. And what used to be adult onset diabetes is now proliferating in our children and our families. Half of Americans now are diabetic or pre-diabetic. Stunningly, a quarter of our children are diabetic or pre-diabetic. And so there's some people that think we should go about this by banning the use of SNAP on certain things. That becomes politically fraught. What we want to do is expand the programs that create incentives. So let me give you an example. When I was mayor of the city of Newark, we knew we had a crisis of food deserts all around our city, and we were trying to expand access. We did a lot of different creative things, but one of the things I loved was taking massive plots of city land and turning them into farms. One of them was an entire city block in a very low-income neighborhood in Newark that we turned into an urban farm. I returned to that farm recently to film a documentary, Food Inc. 2, and did not realize as I'm filming it that women would be coming up and wanting to offer their testimony. So I'll never forget these two elder African-American women. One had gut issues that she had $700 worth of prescription drugs to deal with the problems she was having in her gut. Her copay was $100, and then the rest of it was being picked up by taxpayers, these prescription drugs. But as soon as she started sourcing her food from an organic urban farm in her neighborhood, her gut issues went away. The other one was an octogenarian who had diabetes for years, and she has a little now Instagram account about being a vegan in her 80s, but she actually reversed her diabetes completely. And so the program that they were taking advantage of, that we were talking about, has a terrible name, GusNip, but it's basically the Double Bucks program, where if I go to the supermarket and use $1 of my SNAP to buy sugar water or highly processed food, I get $1 like any consumer. But if I go to fresh fruits and vegetable markets, I can get double that. And when I went there, I used $10 to buy an amount of food at this urban farm. I couldn't believe how much food. I put Whole Foods to shame. But then I realized that other people using SNAP payments could double that amount. And so what we believe in, our philosophy right now in this fight, until the consciousness of our country gets higher and higher and higher, and by the way, when you create these points of light, all of us want to condemn darkness. When people create points of light, show the way, it attracts a lot of attention. We want to expand these programs that can show dramatically that we can make a difference in people's lives, for local farmers and others, if we do these things. So we want to expand the GusNip program. We want to expand programs that incentivize farmers in their practices. We're in the Farm Bill looking to do things. Okay, you know what? I may not be able to end the over-subsidization of highly processed foods, but we had a hearing last week in Washington with local, what they call specialty crop farmers. What are specialty crops in America? Fruits and vegetables. I mean, it's the majority of what we're told to eat. The commodity crops are going to things like ethanol standards in gasoline. They're going to feed, not food, but feed for animals. It's the number one reasons for rainforest deforestation right now is clearing land to grow commodity crops to feed animals. And so what we said is, well, let's talk about why can't people who do specialty crops get crop insurance or other programs that help to sustain the growth of these more regional, local farms that actually create more resilient food systems. So that's what we're looking at in the farm bills. What dials can we turn up? What changes can we make? What pilot programs can we put in to advance the cause and create more points of light that can begin to cast away the darkness and show people like the North Star the way to go?
I want to pick up on one of the bills you mentioned, which is composting, which is something that is done in certain places. Gavin Newsom actually started that as mayor of San Francisco 10 years ago. California now has a law requiring food waste that can't go into landfills, and that can be put on grasslands that creates more forage for cattle, which you may be not somewhat sympathetic to. But talk about composting and how that can create a circular economy so that waste becomes food for nature rather than creating methane in a landfill.
Yeah, I got to give a little bit more California love. I'm the son of a California, my mom, and just thank everybody here for Prop 12, which we just won the Supreme Court case fight, which is just about humaneness to animals. And of course, the pork industry sued because they don't want to give pigs a little bit more room so they don't have such a miserable life.
But they won with this conservative court, right?
Yes, but no, we were able to win the Prop 12 fight recently.
Yeah, California won.
California won. It's the only time I've ever written an amicus brief to the Supreme Court. Maybe my law professors now will respect the fact that I actually used my law degree. But California's doing so many things that are forcing, because you're 40 plus million people here, and such a big, powerful consumer market, when you all make changes, it's hard for those corporations not to have to change their practices nationwide. And I'm really grateful. These propositions on humane raising of animals, these propositions on things like, or these laws you are all passing, things like composting, make such a big difference. And so my team looked at this composting problem, and again, we think that what's lacking in America is a composting infrastructure. And what we're trying to do through our composting law is to create more incentives for state and local communities to shift towards composting. And the power of it, as you alluded to, is that we have first of all, we have a food waste problem. We have another bill all about food waste, but we have a food waste problem in this country that is horrific. About a third of our food is wasted and goes into landfills that create methane, which is significantly more harmful to our climate problem than carbon. And so what we have said is, let's figure out a way not to punish, not to make people complain, my friends on the right, about overregulation, but let's start creating grants and incentives to build out that infrastructure and show, again, points of light of people that are using that composting in such constructive ways, where instead of throwing something away, you compost it and you're actually creating industries, you're creating materials for farmers to use in growing foods. It has, again, this multiplier effect for the investment of a government dollar in the growth of local economies, in the support of local agricultural industries, and more. And so that's what folks lose in this whole thing. And we all, in our language, have to start getting away from falling into the partisan divide. And it's really problematic when you have issues that should unite Americans around common values. And I understand there are big, concentrated corporate interests, but when you start having conversations with human beings and started around what our common values are, you can often arrive at policy conclusions that make it hard for the big corporate concentration to go.
Meat accounts for about 60% of greenhouse gas emissions from food production. One of the biggest tensions in climate conversations is the weight of individual choices versus actions. What should the average person focus on building a more healthy and just food system?
Well, I think these are personal choices we all make, and I'm one of these folks. I'm a vegan, but I'm one of these folks, the last thing I want my government to do is to tell me what to eat. Very ideal of freedom is eat whatever you want. But I will tell you this, I don't want my government picking winners and losers. I don't want my government that is subsidizing some foods to the harm of other foods. We should be creating a far more level playing field and understanding that we are a nation right now that is using practices, forget your diet for a second, that are unsustainable. And as the entire planet Earth is moving more towards the standard American diet, as the globe is moving more towards our diet, we will probably need about 4 planet Earths just to have the land necessary to feed the exploding demand for pork, chicken, and beef. These are not, the way we are doing these practices right now are not sustainable. So I'm just a big believer that we need to start looking at alternative proteins. We need to start making more awareness out there of different alternatives, and also stop picking winners and losers. That said, there's exciting things going on, whether you're vegan or vegetarian or carnivore or what have you. There's a lot of exciting things going on that should inform us all in our policy decisions and perhaps maybe even our personal decisions. So I just sat with Dr. Mark Hyman yesterday, or day before yesterday, in my office, and all he wanted to do was talk to this vegan about buffalo. and Mark he believes that you should reduce the meat, increase vegetables, but he loves his meat and he loves eggs. But he was telling me about this powerful buffalo regenerative farm that he had been to, and I was blown away by what he was talking about, because they're doing rotational grazing and environmentally practices that really harken back to the days that buffalo used to roll the plains. And so he went to explore it, and he said he couldn't believe what this regenerative buffalo farm has achieved. He said that, especially when you compare them to others that are doing it the standard American way,
factory farms.
And he said, in these prairies, the biodiversity exploded. Species of plants that roam the plain that people hadn't seen in years and years and years. The soil became biodiverse. The nutrients in the soil, it was exploding again with life, not dirt, but soil. And then he said what was really interesting to him was, because the soil held water, and I've seen these pictures of people who do farming with chemicals that kill everything in the soil, and it's dirt and it's flooding, rolling one off, right next to farms that use regenerative practices that are green, that are rich. You can see the life in the soil. But the thing that I had never heard before that marked it to me was, he said that in these vast acreage, historically there had been streams and rivers in them, but they had all dried up. But as soon as they turned it back, because the soil was holding so much water, the streams, the rivers, the creeks came back and flowing, to the point that neighbors were jealous of, wait a minute, how did you get this water back on your land? And they weren't doing anything. They weren't out there watering. It was just the power of nature to heal itself if you go back to these regenerative practices. And so I want people to be happy. I think joy should be the center of our being. So I'm not telling you what to eat, but the more I find that I grow my consciousness and align my diet, my shopping habits, especially those of us who are privileged enough to have some flexibility and are not living paycheck to paycheck, which unfortunately is 40+% of Americans, but the ability to align your values and your personal habits together, that's integrity. And living with that integrity isn't something that can be contained within. The most powerful way, and my favorite story in leadership, is about Gandhi entertaining visitors in his tent, the mother who asks Gandhi, you emphasize dietary discipline, and Gandhi, talk about vegan, this guy was like a fruitarian vegan, and she says, tell my son to stop eating sugar, and he goes, I won't. And she seems to protest, and he goes, no, I'm sorry, I won't, but come back in 2 months and ask me again. She comes back into the tent with her son. 2 months later, Mahatma, sir, with great respect, my son will listen to you. His terrible dietary habits, his health is suffering. Would you tell him to stop eating sugar? Gandhi gets up, puts his hands on the son boy. Mahatma touches this child and says, my child, you must stop eating sugar. The mother was pleased. The child was affected, and she's going to leave, but she stops and says, forgive my disrespect, but why didn't you just tell my son to stop eating sugar 2 months ago? And he said, because 2 months ago, I was eating sugar. And so I have seen in my life the greatest impact I can have on others is when I'm deeply authentic, living according to my values. That's what often does. There's nothing worse than a politician that talks right and walks left. And so I want people to pursue their joy. I want people to expand their understanding of Americans, because the most toxic threat to our nation right now, I believe this, and we have real problems in America and we have real problems globally, but I think the most toxic threat is the hate that is growing on Americans for each other. And this is creating an environment where we can't even talk to each other or affirm our common values. I could take you Uniontown, Alabama. I could go through the places where we don't know the absolute misery and suffering of other Americans based upon systems, whether it's the petrochemicals or the food industry, that are poisoning Americans right now. And so that's my bigger frustration, is that, again, there are too many people that just don't know about the systems that we're participating on. And when you expand that lens beyond America,
We don't want to know.
no, and you start visiting other countries, whether it's people working in warehouses that produce the devices we carry around, or the clothing that we have, the poverty that worries me most, and I'm a United States Senator that made a decision to live for the last 25 years in a community or below the poverty line where we don't mistake wealth with worth. I do a lot of economic justice things. The child tax credit, me, Bennett Brown, others fought for it that helped cut poverty, but we couldn't get it to be permanent. Common sense things to address poverty. I do it internationally. But the poverty that most worries me every day is the poverty of empathy in this world, where somehow we just don't understand the suffering of someone that often is not that far away, that we feel no, again, it's not about blame, it's about responsibility, that we feel no responsibility in and live in a blissful ignorance of the challenges that are affecting people, Democrat, Republican, they're affecting people, human beings. And until we can close that gap, then things are not gonna, until we close that gap, we're not gonna make the changes we need to make.
And thank you, Senator, for bringing the power of your heart and your mindfulness into this conversation and here today with us.
Thank you very much.
I hope you'll,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Cory Booker.
Thank you.